Okay, I just finished listening to that Transport Canada call, and for the most part, it seemed almost the same thing as what I heard in the actual live session, but they had some different slides and everything like that, and this one was more specifically focused on recreational flyers, so not as much talk about commercial, as opposed to saying, if you do this, then you become a commercial flyer. There were a lot of technical difficulties in that event, I believe, which stopped a lot of people from asking questions. I don't even think people knew what was going on in many cases. I'll describe it a bit later, but fortunately for me, I figured something was wrong when you're sitting in that room. Is okay, how come there's no voices or anything, no interaction? Usually that's how it is with online conference. So fortunately I was able to capture the audio just from the phone. It is kind of long, a little over 20 minutes, so I guess I'll play the whole thing just in case somebody there actually wants to hear what it was like. And then afterwards I'll give you my thoughts. I know you guys had a lot of comments and stuff like that. I'll probably get to that tomorrow since this one's going to be really long, just to hear all this, just for everyone else to know what it's like.
Welcome to the government teleconferencing service. Bienvenue au service gouvernemental de téléconférence. For service in English, press 1. Pour le service... Please enter your conference ID followed by pound. You will now be placed into the conference.
Well, I'll call out your name and then you can go ahead and ask your question. Alternatively, you can submit your questions in writing by using the chat feature on WebEx. Okay? If we cannot answer the questions, we will have contact information towards the end of the presentation. You can contact us with your questions. If for some reason we cannot address your question, either because of time or because we don't have information at the moment. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to share our screen with all of you. So, and hopefully then you'll be able to see the PowerPoint presentation. And I'm gonna, this one, I'm gonna give the mic to our presenter, Kent.
Good afternoon, and thanks for everyone joining in. It's my pleasure to be able to talk to you all today. I'll go through the slides fairly quickly. Again, they can all be, you can read faster than I can talk. Essentially, the intent is to go through the reasoning behind the need for the regulations, followed by what the current regulations are with interim order number 8, and then we'll get into what the future holds, likely within a year to a year and a half from this time. First of all, we talked the context of risk to aviation, and that we've seen a remarkable increase in the number of incidents reported over the last 3 years. At least the 200% increase, and it looks like we're on path to increase that again this year, in that the incidents for 2017 are only to the June timeframe at the end of the second quarter. We've been getting a lot more reports to the National Online Complaint submissions as well, and we're just getting swamped in the last little while with UAV and unmanned cases. These are a couple of screenshots which came from actual cases that we've had and reports we've received. So you can see that the risk itself is there. A number of people fly their UAVs or drones in a very responsible manner, but there are some who do not, which is the reason we have the enforcement issues we're having these days. So to cover over the current rules by interim order number 8, if you want to look up the entire regulation, it's verbatim. You can just Google interim order 8 and it should come up pretty quickly. So we currently divide drone use between recreational and non-recreational. Non-recreational use are deemed as UAVs or unmanned air vehicles. Non-recreational use is a model aircraft. Essentially, it could be exactly the same piece of equipment, say a DJI Phantom. If you're using it for flying it for fun, it's a model aircraft. If you're flying it for research or business, it's a UAV. Today, we're only going to be addressing for the most part, we're going to be addressing the recreational use. And essentially, To qualify, you have to be flying it for fun. It weighs more than 250 grams, up to 35 kilograms. So essentially, if it's less than 250 grams, we don't regulate it at this time, unless it's flown in a manner that is hazardous to aviation safety. You don't need any special permission from transport, but you have to fly within compliance of the interim order. The maximum fine for an individual is $3,000, and the usual first offense is $750. To comply with the interim order, you must fly below 300 feet above ground. If you're in a very small UAV, you must be 100 feet from vehicles, vessels, and the public. The public includes spectators, bystanders, or any person who is not associated with the operation of your aircraft. And you must be 250 feet or 75 meters if you have a small UAV, 1 kilo to 35 kilos. You must be 3 nautical miles or 5.5 kilometers from airdromes, and 1 nautical mile or 1.8 kilometers from a heliport or an airdrome used by helicopters only. A good source for that is the National Research Council UAV site selection tool or aeronautic charts. Again, if you Google UAV site selection tool, it'll come up. And it's a map of where the majority of the aerodromes are within Canada. You must fly your drone outside of controlled or restricted airspace, 9 kilometers from a natural hazard disaster area, and you must not fly anywhere near where you could interfere with police or first responder operations. You must fly during the day, and you can't fly in clouds. It must be within your sight at all times, and you can't fly any farther than 500 meters from yourself. And you must have your name, address, and telephone number clearly marked on the UAV. There's been some discussion about using QR codes, and as the regulations state right now, that is not an acceptable form of documenting your drone. It must have your name, address, and phone number on the UAV or drone. If you're flying with the Model Aeronautics Association of Canada, at one of their events or one of their fields, these rules do not apply. But you must fly within compliance of the rules of the Model Aeronautics Association of Canada. If you Google MAAC, again, you'll find their site and you can see where their fields are. There's some in Surrey, some in Richmond. So it's a good organization to get some ideas and their insurance coverage. So the tips, again, essentially is fly within compliance of the IO. Fly in the daytime, keep it where you can see it, make sure it's safe to fly, and respect the privacy of others. So if you fly for non-recreational use, you're using it for work or research or any purpose that's not solely for the enjoyment of flying it, you need to get a special flight operator certificate. Each one of those documents explains how and where you can fly. There are exemptions to the SFOC requirements, and you go on the Transport Canada site and you can see what the exemptions are. But even if you do fly using the exemption, you must notify transport before you fly a given operation. And so under the aviation regulations, flying without an SFOC has a fine of $5,000 or $25,000 maximum. And if you don't fly within the requirements or the conditions stated in your certificate, it's a $3,000 or $15,000 fine. Moving on to the new regulations, if you Google UAS Gazette 1, UAS, which is Unmanned Air Systems, UAS Gazette 1, you'll get the big list of what the proposal for the regulations going forward. Essentially, it is risk-based, and the rules are designed around the pilot, the product, and the operating rules for the sizes. So the hazard to aviation doesn't change whether you're flying it recreational or non-recreationally. The same piece of equipment is going to impact the aircraft and cause a hazard, no matter the purpose for which you're flying. And the categories for the UAVs become very small, which is 250 grams to 1 kilo, small limited, 1 kilo to 25, and small complex, 1 kilo to 25. And essentially, as the size and the complexity of an operation moves up, or the environment in which the operation is conducted gets more complex, the risk increases. This is a slide just indicating some examples of some of the UAVs and where they would fall into the categories. For example, a DJI Inspire would be a small aircraft, and a Parrot AR 2.0 would be a very small. We would not regulate anything in the micro category, and the Model Aeronautics Association of Canada, for anything less than 35 kilos, would not be subject to these regulations. The first part of the rules essentially would cover off general provisions. These apply to all three of the categories. You have to follow the manufacturer's rules, fly in Canada, field right away, fly within a visual line of sight, minimum altitudes, so that you're able to glide clear of a hazard. The crew is fit, and there's no living creatures on the aircraft. There's rules around use of portable electronic devices, no autonomous UAS, first-person view if you have a visual observer, no hazardous payloads, unless you have an SFOC. You cannot operate from a moving vehicle vessel, and you cannot operate at special aviation events. Again, those can be covered off with a special flight operator certificate. A very small UAS. So under the pilot, there's age limits. You got to be 14. You have to successfully complete a written exam. You have to have insurance. Product, name, address, and telephone number, and that it's properly maintained. And the rules, same as you must be fit. You must stop operating if there's any incident, and you cannot operate in a reckless or negligent manner. And some of the basic distances don't change from the current IO. A lot of it is very similar. Some of the distances, for example, 0.25 nautical miles is 1,500 feet. For the very small UAS specific requirements, it also includes must be in Class G, or we call uncontrolled airspace, maximum speeds of 25 knots. There's no flying over people, and you must be clear of cloud and have at least 2 statute miles of visibility. For the limited UAS, so back to 1 kilo to 25 kilos, cannot be operated in a built-up area. It has to be half a nautical mile away from a built-up area, about 3,000 feet or 1.2 kilometers. 16 is the minimum age. Same exam, liability insurance, distances. They're all on the slide in front of you. The only real change is you have to maintain technical records of how airtime and maintenance actions you've done on your product. And again, as per the interim order, it's 250 feet from people, vehicles, and vessels, but it's 500 feet from open assembly of persons. And no night operation. Specific requirements: crews have to be trained and competent. It must be uncontrolled airspace. Maximum speed of 87 knots. You can go within above 300 feet above ground if you are within 200 feet of a building or structure, but to a maximum of 100 feet above that height. And no flight over an open area assembly of persons. Also, the weather requirements: clear cloud, 2 miles visibility. You must assess risk. Follow all the normal procedures. No towing, no formation flying, no airbags unless you have a special flight operator certificate. You must meet the capable requirements, and there's icing considerations. For the complex operations, the same age applies. The difference is the highlighted being you must have a Transport Canada pilot permit for complex UAS operation, or you will have to have. You must do recurrent training every 2 years, same liability insurance requirement. Your drone will be registered with unique Transport Canada markings. And you must have position and anti-collision lights when you do night operation. With the operating rules, because complex operations are allowed in controlled airspace, you must be able to coordinate with air traffic control and maintain two-way communication. The maximum altitudes are increased, visual distances are increased, and you're allowed to fly in much closer proximity to airdromes and heliports, subject to the notification of ATC. So essentially, the complex operations allow you to operate with much more freedom, but you have to prove that you are competent and capable of operating your drone in close proximity to other people and structures. So specific requirements: there is allowance to fly within Class C, Class D, E, F, and uncontrolled airspace, but you must do the coordination, military or civil, with air traffic controllers. No night vision goggles unless you have a visual observer who is not using NVGs. And you're allowed to fly over open air assembly of persons, but again, you must make sure you can glide clear. The restrictions, it's much less restrictive, but with that comes requirements to prove competence. So this is essentially the implementation plan. So for very small, you have to do the knowledge training, register for an exam, confirm who you are, write an online exam, mark your machine, have your certificate out, and then you can go fly, as long as you follow the rules outlaid. Same for limited operation. Online exam to prove your competency, mark your your drone, and follow the rules and fly. For the complex, so again, you need to do training, submit application for your permit, schedule an exam, and once the exam is passed, you can submit your the results to transport, which will then issue your permit. And for the machine itself, it's either a compliant UAS or it's been grandfathered within the regulations. Again, same process. Documents go to transport, they're reviewed, then your registration for your machine will be issued, and your marks will be issued to put on your on the machine. So, Transport is working with other law enforcement partners. The key is, again, just to get more eyes on the ground. So as of May of this year, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police have been granted authorization to issue monetary penalties for non-compliance of the interim order, and there is conversations in the works to deal with other law enforcement agencies to allow them to enforce the regulations as they come forward. And if you do receive a fine for not being in compliance with the interim order or the new regs coming up, you will have an opportunity to appeal your fine through the Transportation Appeal Tribunal of Canada, same as any aviation pilot. So the goal is to integrate UAS into Canadian airspace in a safe manner, and the regulatory framework's been developed based, flexible, and consistent moving forward. So pilots must essentially have sufficient knowledge of the rules, airspace, and safety procedures to ensure safe integration within manned airspace. The pilot permit requirement is commensurate with our risk, aircraft weight, and performance characteristics and the conditions provided for the operation. Very small and small limited operational categories will require knowledge testing, much like marine operators are required to have a boat license. It's essentially to be able to fly within eased regulations. There needs to be evidence that the people are competent and know where they're supposed to fly. As shown in the pictures earlier, some people just don't know where not to fly. So we're ensuring safety by integrating the systems in a fair and forward-thinking manner, creating predictability, and recognizing innovation. Because quite often, as in most parts of regulation, the technology is ahead of where regulation is, and they're almost constantly in a catch-up mode with regulation. So on the screen in front of you is the contact information. It's a fairly long email address, but any email that goes into that email address will be sorted through and distributed to the most relevant subject matter expert. The enforcement number is 604-666-5586. The typo on the slide, 604-666-5586 is the direct line to Pacific Region Enforcement. If you have any particular questions that aren't answered in the next in the QA session, feel free to feel free to call, and don't hesitate to call. All right, so question answered. I'll put the previous slide back up.
All right. So, after the presentation, I will be able to forward some of the links to the information as well as the contact information to Kevin Chan, the organizer of the group, so that he could circulate with the membership. So now we'll take question. Again, we'll ask you to use the raise hand feature. Hopefully we'll be able to see from here. And then I'll call out your name and we'll address the question. I'm not seeing any hands raised yet. Anybody has any questions?
Peter, I'm trying to raise my hand, but I don't know if you see it.
Not yet. Okay, but go ahead. Oh, so is that Jeff?
No, it's August.
Okay, August, go ahead and ask the question. Yes.
Do you know of any of the preliminary details regarding the pilot certification? And is it going to be training from a third party and then exam with Transport Canada, or will Transport Canada have partners that allow us to get certified?
the current information I have essentially is that there will be, for most of the exams, not for the pilot permit, but for the other exams, there will be authorized invigilators. Essentially, you complete the training, and there will be a transport will have a list of people who are authorized to invigilate the exam for you. Does that answer the question, or is there something I missed?
Yeah, no, and I was just wondering about training programs in terms of getting the pilot certificate. So I guess those would be third party as well, correct? Just certified.
Yeah, I assume they will, once the regulations have gone through the gazetting process, they'll be putting in place, same as for the pilots, they'll have flight test guides or exam guides. And they usually include practice exams. So I'm not sure the details of how they're going to roll that out. But when it does come out, I'm sure there'll be some online training sources, or they'll have third parties like commercial ground schools that the regular pilots would go through.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next up we have Jess Cass. Can you go ahead and ask your question, please?
I was wondering if there was going to be any grandfathering for existing licensed pilots who had done ground school and were currently operating under compliant operator status?
I'm not sure the exact answer, but my assumption would be that if you've done the ground training, you simply have to do the new exam for the new regulation.
Okay. The other question I wanted to ask was, is there been anything announced for what the process is for having people being able to administer those? I know that we'd have interest in getting someone internally at our company certified as someone who could conduct those exams.
I haven't seen any details on that yet, but if you give me your contact info or send me an email later on, or give me a call, I'll get your contact information. I'll try and get an answer for that one.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jess. So next up we have Nick Williams. Go ahead and ask your question, Nick.
Hi. My question's about the insurance for recreational users. At the moment, there are very few, if any, providers for such insurance for recreational use. So how much of a lead time is there going to be on requiring that insurance in the regulations?
Well, as it stands now, the new regulations are what's called Gazette 1, so it's going to be at least another 8 to 10 months for public feedback and review. And then once it gets through that process, it'll go into what's called Gazette 2, and then it's 6 months from that point it becomes a regulation. So it's at least 14 to 18 months from now.
Does that address your question, Nick?
Well, I guess the only remaining part then is if once it gets formalized, whether there'll be any grace period on things like the insurance until there's suppliers.
I don't have that answer, but I'll put it forward to the regulator folks in Ottawa and ask the question. And again, if you get back to me, I'll try and have an answer for you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any more questions? Because I've only seen 3 hands raised so far. This is your opportunity.
I was just going to ask if we could get a direct email, or should we be using the aviation service email?
No, I'll give you mine. It's kent.wickens @tc.gc.ca.
All right, thank you.
No problem.
Thanks. Any other questions? No? Once again, following the presentation, I won't forward the presentation per se, but I will forward links to the information, both to the current interim order and the new regulations that are being proposed, as well as the general content information to Kevin Chan, the organizer of the share that with the members of the Vendron's users. Okay, so if there are no other further questions, I'd like to say thank you to Kent for taking the time to talk to all of you, and thanks to Kevin and August for organizing this session, in partnership with Transport Canada. Hopefully this is a good start, and if there is further interest, we can certainly do something similar in the future for any members who are unable to make it today.
Thanks so much, Peter.
Thank you. All the best.
Appreciate it. I'll try to get the answers, and I'll get back to you, or give me an email. I'll see what I can come up with the answers for the 3 questions I got taken away. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
So one of the weird things about that conference again was it seemed like for those type of conferences, usually how it works is everyone logs in front of their computers and then the host would mute everybody except themselves so you can actually hear it. But from what I gathered, it seemed like they muted everyone in general, like they couldn't even hear anything. So I've gathered, from what I gathered, it looked like some people were on their webcams and you can see them walking everywhere like, hey, what's going on? Like, why is there no sound? So I'm assuming they didn't hear anything because they didn't know what was going on. But fortunately for me, I actually phoned in and I recorded it. So that's why I basically published it here, just in case there were people that wanted to listen to it to see what it was about. He just attested too, because I was waiting for if anyone else had any questions, and he goes, press that hand. I pressed that hand, as you can see, and nobody asked me like, oh, you have a question, what is it? Oh man, it's so disorganized, I guess, tech-wise. Did you guys get anything new out of that? To me personally, it seemed like the same thing for the most part. It just seemed like they were still a bit unsure in terms of answering questions about the drones and stuff in general. Same kind of rhetoric saying there's no difference in terms of risk. If this thing is that close to the airport or whatever, it's still the same risk, which I still think is a little dumb. There was actually supposed to be a virtual session for people in Toronto too, but that was supposed to be more official, not just for the recreation. It was supposed to be for everybody. Makes me wonder if they're doing the same thing, and you're gonna have people confused saying, hey, how come I don't hear anything in the conference? Actually, one troublesome thing about that I was thinking, because of the technical difficulties where even though people like myself click the button and say, hey, question, since they didn't actually ask anybody, would they actually bring that back afterwards just in terms of a data and say, hey, look, nobody asked any questions, therefore they love the proposed regulations. Now maybe you guys picked something out of that presentation that I missed, but there it is. I just uploaded it for everyone else to see, so you guys know where Transport Canada stands so far anyways, to see if they're accepting any real feedback in terms of actually working towards changing it so that it helps everybody eventually. Alright, other than that, I'll wrap it up because it's getting a little long since you guys probably watched all of that. I'll probably try to contact the DGI tomorrow and see what happens, and just to see if they follow through with everything. I'll respond to some of the comments too in the one tomorrow. Anyways, see you guys later.